Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. So as you might be able to tell, I'm filming this on Ash Wednesday, and I just wanted to share a few thoughts about Ash Wednesday. I've had other Ash Wednesday videos, like one called The Ashes of Ash Wednesday, talking about why it is that in America we actually have this visible, even though today is the gospel reading where Jesus says, when you're fasting, don't look gloomy and stuff. Wash yourself and so on, so people can't tell that you're fasting. And so there's sort of an interesting practical contradiction in a sense. And I made a video all about that. So I'm not going to go into that. I'm thinking more actually today of the fasting element of it. Now I didn't grow up with the idea of fasting, and so I'm not really, not necessarily therefore, but anyway, I'm not really good at fasting. And when I first started actually doing the practices of fasting, it was hard at first, especially, and I'm still not good at it. But there's sort of two main points to the practice of fasting. And I just wanted to briefly sort of mention what they are and why. One of the points of fasting is penitential. And so the penitential aspect of it is, you tend to hear very legalistic language, like paying for your sins or atoning for your sins. But in a more philosophical sense, what's going on, and it's not to say that those are wrong, it's just legalistic metaphors. We don't really understand justice in the modern world, and so legal metaphors don't really convey much of anything. We tend to think of law very much as not connected to reality. So what's going on in sort of a deeper sense there, penitentially, is that whenever we sin, we attach ourselves to things in the wrong way. Sin is always placing some lower good above a higher good. Sin is an inversion of the natural order. Frequently, it is placing some lower good above the creator, but it can be just placing a lower good above a higher good even within the natural order. To give a sort of simple example, gluttony can be placing the good of food above the good of some other person. So, a simple example is not being willing to share food because you want it all for yourself. You are placing that lower good of that food for yourself above the higher good of sharing, of loving, of being good to another creature. Okay. In all sin, we are always, by inverting this natural order, we are over-attaching ourselves to these lower goods. And so the penitential aspect of fasting is, in a proper sense, in a modernly intelligible sense, intelligible in a modern context, it is detaching ourselves from these lower goods. So by not eating when we are hungry in fasting, we are therefore detaching ourselves from this lower good of food, not because it's not good, but rather precisely because it is good, but it's not as good as we have become attached to it as. And so by detaching ourselves, we are fixing that damaged relationship where we have put too much emphasis on it. We have become too attached to it. And so this is, justice is balance. This is by going in sort of an extreme other direction, we are fixing ourselves. We're balancing things out so that we have a correct relationship, placing only the correct importance upon it. So it is in that sense medicinal. It is in that sense punitive, because all good punishments actually exist to create a balance, to fix what has gone wrong. And so that's the penitential aspect of it, that it fixes what we have done wrong. And there's an aspect too, because human beings are a community where we can do penance for each other. And so, at the end of time, when we come to know each other better, in a more full sense, we can share in this sort of penance. We can do this for each other, in that this sort of detachment can be shared to another. Although you can even see that in people who are overly attached to things can derive benefit from somebody else's penance, just seeing that somebody else has the ability to not place such importance on the thing, to like it but still refrain from it, can give other strength even on this side of death. Okay, the other thing about fasting is that it is things like, well, fasting also has the effect of being the equivalent of like spiritual exercise. That is to say, in the same way that push-ups make you physically stronger, fasting makes you spiritually stronger, because it is exercising, in a literal sense, it is exercising your will. It is exercising your ability to say, I choose to do the following, and despite the fact that I have strong inclinations against that, I'm still going to do the following. I'm still going to do whatever this particular thing is, or I'm not going to do this, and despite having a strong pull to it, I am still in control of myself and not doing it. And the more you do that, the better you become at it. The more you exercise self-control, the more you're good at controlling yourself. And that's why I mentioned, like, when I first started years, I forget when I first really kept the Lenten fast, maybe let's say about 10 years ago, something like that. It was really, I mean, that first Ash Wednesday when I first started was really hard. And I'm talking about the Catholic fast, which is best described as a candy-ass fast. Not necessarily the nicest language, but really kind of captures it. It is, interestingly, I've heard that, like, the distinction, the two different approaches of the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox are the Orthodox. The standard instructions are extremely hard, that most people can't live up to, and you strive to meet them, and most people fall short to some degree or other, and you learn about your weakness and you learn humility through this. The Catholic approach, by contrast, is to tell everybody the absolute minimum that anyone can do. This is the minimum, you have to do this, and then you're encouraged to do more. So the Catholic fast is, you are permitted one meal on a day when you're fasting. You can have as much water as you want. You're permitted one meal, and then, if necessary, 2 small snacks that together do not add up to a meal. And so that first time, when I was fasting, like, I desperately needed those snacks, and I was still having such a hard time of it, and I was getting grumpy, and I was getting, I was getting, like, angry is not quite the right word, but, like, I had very, very little patience for anyone or anything, and it was not, like, that is to say, I was not being great to those around me, and I worked through it, and I got through it, but it was really hard. Subsequent times were not so bad, and these days, most of the time, I don't even have one of those snacks on days of fasting. Most days, I'll just have the one meal and no snacks of any kind of anything else, which is still the Catholic candy-ass fast. But nonetheless, it is still, stricter than the absolute minimum, and I don't find it that hard to do that. I have a big meal. I don't go, like, radically overboard. I don't eat, like, 3 meals worth of food in that one meal. But it's a substantial meal that I have. And, so far that's around the best that I can do. As I said, I'm not very good at fasting, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. And as far as I can tell, it is way less obvious to the people that I'm living with that I am fasting. I'm not grumpy and short-tempered and so on. And so that aspect actually works, that by practicing, I've gotten better. I've still got a long way to go to be good at fasting. But I've also come a fairly long way. And it's interesting to see the effect of that it really helps. And moreover, it also helps in unforeseen circumstances, times when, for whatever reason, I end up having to not eat for by American standards, a long time. I have to skip a meal or something like that, and food's not available. And having practiced at this, it is way easier to not be hangry. That combination of angry and, because you're hungry, that I can be in much better self-control. I can treat everyone around me much better in those circumstances. I'm still reminded of when I was in grad school. I had a fellow graduate student from Cameroon by the name of Julius, and he asked, just in conversation, he asked me one time, he mentioned something effective, but his phrasing was essentially like, what's the longest you've ever gone without food involuntarily? And I was thinking like, wow, I don't know, 6 hours or something? And he mentioned that, being Cameroonian, for him, that answer was more like a day or more. Like a full 24 hours or more. And, you can find parts of the world where that answer is much longer. And it was funny, like, I had never thought of that. Like, until he had posed that question, what's the longest you've ever gone without food involuntarily? And I realized, like, wow, being an American, that answer is a really short time. We just have food incredibly available. And, and that's good. That is certainly a good thing, and that is a thing to be grateful to God for, and I am grateful to God for that. I very much like eating. But at the same time, it was a kind of fascinating thing. And since then, it's been almost 20 years since that question was asked and answered. And since then, there have been times when I end up going without food for longer, especially with children. You just don't have the time to eat, and because you have to do things and so on. And so that practice of being able to control yourself even though you're feeling hungry is actually really, really useful practice. It does come up even in ludicrously wealthy America, where food is never more than a few minutes away if you actually are serious about wanting it. Nonetheless, it's still actually very useful to do that practice, and it is interesting that practice works. So the fasting, even relatively simple fasting, has both effects to it. And it's kind of interesting to see. I still, sort of dread the approach of Lent. Lent is a very good and useful time. The penitential time of Lent has all sorts of benefits of, separating ourselves from our, subjugating the flesh so that the spirit is in control of the flesh, separating ourselves from our worldly desires, focusing on, on the penitential life. I mean, it's on and on. Lent is very good. The preparation for Easter, the balance and so on of you prepare for 40 days and then celebrate for 50 days the resurrection of Christ and the goodness of God and so on. I mean, it go on and on and on and on with how good it is. I dread it only in the sense of I don't find the fasting easy at all. It's not easy. Even the candy-ass Catholic fasting is not easy. And, so I kind of, just have these feelings of dread. But that said, I know I can get through it. And then, the days of fasting come and I do it and it's actually okay. It's not that bad. And it's kind of interesting to see that even though I still have that that sort of, I feel that fear, with each Lent that passes and, and the, the penitential fasting and so on that goes on, that aspect of practice works, that even though I fear it, it's not that bad when it happens and you can deal with it just fine. And, who knows, someday maybe I'll be strong enough to go, further past the bare minimum that's necessary. God grant me that strength. But it's interesting to see, even with the little that I do, that it has an effect, that it actually has that sort of positive effect in addition to the penitential effect. So, anyway, just some thoughts on Ash Wednesday. Hope you have a blessed day. And until next time, may you hit everything you aim at